Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup for August 31st, 2022. This is our long-awaited 200th episode of our Midweek Roundup that began back in 2018. Over 4 years ago, we began this journey with our live chats on Wednesday afternoons Eastern Time. And now 4 years later, we're still going strong, and we're grateful to all those that have been part of that journey over the last 4 years, whether you've been catching us live on Facebook for the first 3 or 4 years, or recently when we've added in a restream to allow us to simulcast across Twitter, LinkedIn, our YouTube channel, and our Facebook page, of course, for our midweek roundups. So we're glad that you're a part of the journey. I've had so many people comment over the last couple of months related to the roundup that they say, really appreciate the live chats. Can't always catch them live, but I watch them on repeat, or I download the podcast, I subscribe to the podcast, and really excited to share this 200th episode with you today. And we've got some great questions that we'll be getting to today that really typify where we are, not only in international education in the United States and around the world today, but also time of year. We're going to be talking about orientation as one of those perennial issues that always bewitches international offices, and how do you make the most from this international student orientation time. So let's get right into it. As we do each week, friends, we take our news stories from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays, on Monday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can either get to that directly from our website. You can subscribe to that if you're not already getting that on in your inboxes on Monday mornings. You can subscribe through that button. I'm going to drop the link to the most recent edition of the newsletter. That will be from that newsletter. We'll be covering some of the stories in that as we get to the questions that we have. If you prefer LinkedIn as the way to get your news, we also have a newsletter, LinkedIn version of our newsletter that you can subscribe to, and also get that Monday mornings in your inbox. So whichever way you choose, we appreciate you subscribing, and then obviously watching the live shows, or watching on repeat, or subscribing to the podcast version, the audio-only podcast version. So thanks again for being a part of this journey. So let's get right into our questions of the week. First up, should U.S. universities give up on China? Now, this is a question that for anyone who knows me or who has been in international education for more than a minute, giving up on your number one source of students is a fool's errand. You do that and you're shooting yourself in the foot. Whatever other metaphor you'd like to use, it's not the smartest idea out there in terms of seeing the last 10 years, or probably 7 years, seeing a decrease in the number of Chinese students coming to the United States. There was just a natural bubble there that we saw, but also more markets opening up for Chinese students on the outbound side. You've also seen some political issues, frankly, that in the previous administration that soured relations even further, that have not entirely been corrected in this particular administration or addressed. You see issues like Taiwan flaring up, and how that has impacted relations or continues to impact relations. For the first time ever, I had this experience with a training for agents where we provided a top 10 list or a top 5 list of the countries that we had at our particular institution, and one of those countries was Taiwan. And the agent stopped us after the session while we were still recording and said, hey, just want to let you know this isn't going to play well for our mainland China market, because particularly if parents see this or our agents see this, agents were commenting to her that back channel that this was insulting. So the issue of Taiwan is very significant, and how you present yourself to the Chinese market is obviously mainland and elsewhere is a particular concern. So how you recruit, where you recruit, what presence you have digitally on the ground through networks of agents or partners, all of that matters. But the question of should U.S. universities give up on China really is a rhetorical one. Of course you shouldn't, because it is still the number one and will be for at least the next 2 or 3 years until India overtakes it and previous weeks' news. You've seen us talking here on the Roundup about the rise of India. It has always been the number 2, or for the last 15 or so years, 16, 17 years, has always been number 2. Prior to that, it was number 1. And my guess is in the next 3 to 4 years, India will surpass China in terms of overall number of students in the United States. Obviously, it's growing now, but it will take some time to displace China. Unless China suddenly rebounds dramatically. Now, whether it will or not is another story. And there's a couple of news stories that I'm sharing, both of which are from the PI News. First one up is China outbound expected to improve. We'll go into those details and some of those stories. And a follow-on from last week's news, where we shared U.S. issues fewer China visas as interest declines. There's another twist in that story, which we'll get to in a second. And I want to cover both of those as we go through and actually dig into this question on China. It's a very complex country. It is not a monolithic one, unless you talk about issues like Taiwan. But you certainly will find in China that it is beyond the tier 1 cities of Beijing, Shanghai, Shenyang, Guangzhou, Shenzhen. You will find that tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 cities. There's a great diversity in terms of where students are looking, in terms of how open they are to colleges or universities that aren't necessarily named schools, because those typically are the main drivers in the major cities. But for those tier 2 and 3 cities, there's more willingness to be open to those other institutions that aren't top-ranked schools. But we also see this first article on China outbound expected to improve. There's a couple of quotes in here that I think are very, very useful. One of the centerpieces of this story is a report that Synorbis did with BOSA. BOSA, if you don't know, that's the agent association in China, the largest agent association there, and it shares that there is the study abroad service industry is one quote from this article from the PI News and from the report. China's study abroad service industry will also continue to recover as we believe it has reached the bottom of its 2.5-year decline and is steadily rising again. And that's from John Santangelo of BOSA when he was interviewed by the PI News. But what the anxieties that the Chinese market has, they've obviously been in their own bubble, so to speak, for the last 2.5 years because of the pandemic. They're now starting to emerge. We're seeing stories in the news this week of China opening back up to international students in small chunks, and the students have to get their university's permissions first before the government will issue visas to re-enter. But so that's picking up slowly, and we'll see how well that rebound happens on the inbound side. But on the outbound side, you're seeing now 2.5 years of a large group of Chinese students that have basically been doing online courses, whether they decided to start their studies remotely in Australia, UK. Many were able to get out and go to the UK because the UK has been booming with their inbound Chinese population recently, and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future, it looks like. But you see now that some of the concerns and anxieties among Chinese outbound students are related to safety. And the report actually shares that safety is now the #1 concern that many students have, followed closely by cost of living and academic performance. So those from this most recent report by BOSA and Synorbis reflect some changing in the dynamics, where it's no longer rankings being the top factor that is, or concern that is affecting where students will go. So there's some movement in the Chinese market in terms of what those priorities are. And these anxieties, as the report says, they develop according to situations outside of most HEI's, higher education institutions' control, and will shift in nuance between destination countries and institutions, which is why it's so important to consistently engage with your own prospective and current Chinese students, along with news and industry insights, he explained. So I love that because it points to a couple of factors that really speak to not just China, but any country market that you're developing in or potentially seeing some movement in, that you're trying to identify what's going on the ground. Talking to your current students, they have some pretty good insights. They probably just come in or recently come in and still have friends back home that are going through some of the changes. Maybe can give you insight. They're on WeChat and the other social platforms that are China specific that will be able to give you a feel for what's happening. Having someone either as a student worker or a GA in your international office, I think, is absolutely essential from China or from that is Mandarin speaking is critical. Having that kind of finger on the pulse is important, and you get that from a number of places, but from your current students, that's going to be particularly important. But also talking to your partners in country, because right now there still aren't recruitment trips that are going to be successful going to China because you still have quarantine. Even though they've reduced the amount of time, you still have to be on your own dime for a week or more before you can actually do any recruiting. And then who knows, moving around China, what the challenges you'll face will be. But I see what is really important here is keeping abreast of what's going on, having current student feedback, having industry insights, having partner insights on the ground that can really feed. That's regardless of what market you're talking about, but particularly in China, because none of us are able to go there physically and be there on the ground and have the conversations in person. You're relying on what you're getting from your partners on the ground, from your students, from your agents, whatever it might be, parents. All of that is important. So I think what you now need to realize with China, and I think one of the pieces here that we see, even though someone has has referenced in this article from Bonnard, shows that almost 100% their research, almost 100% of agencies are in fact promoting higher ed related programs. Whereas others like K through 12, English language and summer courses are not being promoted. So higher ed is definitely back on the agenda for Chinese agencies. But we're seeing, and one of the people from Bonnard has made the case that markets can bounce back faster if the institutions are well equipped, well engaged with the local markets. And it's something that I think is definitely needs to be kept at the forefront of your mind as you hopefully stay engaged with China and not retreat. For some institutions that are trying, maybe already have strong Chinese populations without really trying, you maybe don't feel as much urgency. But I know a particular institution I'm working with, we're developing programs internationally in terms of recruitment and being really structured about how we go about it. And we've been told that we're going to pause anything heavy in China because of some kind of feelings that the market might not be bouncing back. But I think what comes from my lesson learned from this experience in terms of hearing what's going on in China, hearing what's happening on the industry insights, is that it is coming back. It's maybe not going to be nearly the peak that we had in 2014, 2015. But what I think one of the commenters said, the outbound market, like the inbound market, will recover, but not overnight. What is more important, however, is how educators and agencies fully maximize the opportunity and how willing to engage and commit resources to engaging in China and staying ever present or establishing a presence in the minds of the Chinese market. So that's the first PI News article. The second one, U.S. issues fewer visas as interest declines, picks up on the 50% less visas issued this in 2021 as opposed to in 2021 versus pre-pandemic. That we're seeing a decrease in number of students, new students coming from China to the United States, mostly pandemic and political motivations there or reasons why. Simply haven't been able to travel. One of the other comments here in this article was that one of the factors that will impact for U.S. market in particular in terms of whether China will bounce back as a market for them. It says it depends on whether U.S. educators are willing to make more effort and investment in the China market. So if your institution is pulling back or considering not investing when you don't already have a presence, then you're not going to see, obviously, a bounce back because you're basically detaching yourself, your institution, from that market in terms of an actual physical, either digital or physical presence, obviously not being there for yourselves, but having the partner network in country that can really represent you. And the digital piece is key. When you're not doing that, you're really missing out on how that market communicates and how they get information. So that's really one of the factors within China that I think more U.S. colleges need to certainly pay attention to. One way that U.S. institutions can solve a problem like China, we'll talk about the problem like orientation in a bit, but when it comes to solving a problem like China and how you communicate with your prospective student audiences is how well you leverage your current student audiences. And here I'm talking about having, and the next article is from intl. They've done some research work on student handbooks that have been produced by on-campus Chinese student associations that operated either as part of the university or with the endorsement of the university. Some are entirely independent. That have have maybe a more creative side, that more jokes and anecdotes. But these are all handbooks that were published in Chinese and made available to students, prospective students that are incoming to the university. This has been done at Penn State, Vanderbilt, UT Austin, UC San Diego, University of Maryland, and Stanford. So the 6 examples that, or 6 institutions that the intl team reviewed. So those are very practical examples that make sense, that working with your Chinese Student Association to help develop that kind of a resource. Because what is that? If it's produced by the Chinese students on campus, it's going to have a level of authenticity and authority for prospective student audiences that you're not able to deliver yourself as the international office. Because it's direct from your students, and the students give you that authenticity, and it's a more particular and precise way to present the message that you want to be delivered to your prospective student audiences in markets where you are struggling to get a grip or struggling to make an impact. When you can leverage your on-campus resources in the form of your student organizations, in the form of your current students who can do something in language prepared for prospective students who are on their way in, that's going to turn your boat around very quickly in terms of making an impact, making a direct impression on your prospective audiences, not just of your students that are in the mix or in the pipeline for enrollment, but for their parents especially. When we're talking about where the real struggles have come is with the undergraduate market in recent years. Those numbers have dropped significantly. There's no denying that, and part of that is parents have gotten aren't as comfortable sending their sons and daughters here, and that safety issue, as the previous articles mentioned, that's the number one concern or anxiety that they have. So how do your current Chinese students address that issue, and have them tell that story and address that particular piece that really makes sense? Really has value to prospective audiences. So that's a real I think important insight into the Chinese market that institutions in the United States really need to get a hold of, and is how well you're leveraging your current assets on campus to reach your future student audiences in China. So hopefully that gives a little help on that front. The second question of the day is one that we talk about infrequently, but every once in a while we do mention the power of soft power in international education. We've talked about that in reference mostly to what China's been doing over the last few years with their Belt and Road Initiative. That has been clearly a soft power initiative that is designed to help grow China's influence in the world through financial relationships with and transportation and educational relationships that they've built throughout the developing world. in South and East Asia, in Africa, and even into some parts of Europe. You've seen those efforts see and have borne fruit, with China now becoming a major destination for international students, not just the top sender to outside of their home country. They are now the number, probably slipped down a bit, probably number 4 or 5 or maybe 6 now, post-pandemic, but they're hoping to rebound. But they have made considerable efforts to become this, to improve their soft power and more probably political, economic, maybe there's an educational component to it, but probably more political and economic. But we talk about soft power in the United States in a number of different ways. If you remember, the State Department, their mission is public diplomacy. That's their main goal, is to provide those that come to the United States a positive experience, hopefully on their campuses that they attend, in the communities that they live, and take those positive experiences about the United States back to their home countries, where they become leaders in business, in medicine, in engineering and law, whatever it might be, and in their political systems back home. And that's where we get to that kind of public diplomacy, where in the State Department they used to call it foreign students today, world leaders tomorrow. They had back when I was working with Education USA in the noughties, we had a publishable list, PDF at the time, of world leaders who had spent part of their education in the United States. Now, what's the state of play today? It's not just the U.S. that has had this reputation of doing this. The U.K., other Western nations have prided themselves on delivering, having students who come to their countries, study at their institutions, and return home have developed better working relationships and more positive relationships with their country as a result of their educational experiences in their nation. So there has been, since 2017, kind of a ranking, if you will, of countries and their soft power index that HEPI in the UK has developed since 2017, that ranks countries by the number of world leaders, current world leaders, that have been educated in countries other than their own. And at that time, and there's a Times Higher Ed story that I've dropped the link to in the chat on the Facebook page and YouTube channel, and we'll be dropping that. So you can either get that from the newsletter links that I posted earlier in the chat, or I'll be adding those into our Twitter and LinkedIn feeds a little bit later on this afternoon. So in terms of what you can do, in terms of understanding the soft power, what this HEPI list does share. In the first year of that index, there were more world leaders who had been educated in the UK than any other country. But since that time, the U.S. has overtaken the UK in 2018 and has been extending that lead since. So that the most recent edition for 2022 from HEPI, Higher Education Policy Institute, if you're wondering what that acronym is, shows that 67% current serving leaders around the world were educated in the United States, up 2 on last year, up 10 since 2017. In contrast, the UK educated 55, down 2 on last year, and down 3 since 2017. So the UK has fallen behind. Other world leaders have studied in numbers in France. That's in number 3, third position at 31. So considerable distance behind the U.S., more than 50% less. Then Russia, interestingly, at 10. 10 current world leaders have spent time in their higher education in Russia. Australia and Switzerland both have 7. Canada and Germany 6, and Italy and South Africa 5. So an interesting range of this, and that soft power index. What does that mean? I think it's more of a prestige thing, I think, than anything else. But it's something that, as international educators in the United States, maybe this is one of the things that, when we talk about perspective. For those that have been working with me and have been watching our 6P series that we did in the last couple of years, that first P of the 6 Ps of Strategic International Enrollment Management is perspective, right? And the perspective we're talking about here as it relates to soft power is having that global perspective of not only where the U.S. stands in relation to its peers for recruiting international students. We always encourage institutions when we talk about having a global perspective to know what the competition is doing and know that your competition isn't just your domestic rivals for applications. It's often other countries' universities and colleges that are your rivals for international student applications. So that's one part of perspective. The other is an internal perspective. But when I talk about perspective to institutions about this means how this also affects how you should be marketing your institution, not just focusing on how you're better than your domestic peers, and which really doesn't necessarily matter to international students, but how first, not just talking about your own institutional qualities and why you should come here, but also focusing more on why you should study in the United States. And part of that reason is the campus experience that students get in the United States that they typically can't get anywhere else in the world, or don't get as well as they do in the rest of the world. The global quality of institutions that we have in the United States, but looking at national ranking, international rankings, and all of that. But then also looking at something like this, the Soft Power Index, and realizing that more world leaders are educated here in the United States than anywhere else in the world. Having that as what you can say, part of your message to a prospective student should be why the United States, not just why your university, but why the United States. You can go into OPT, STEM OPT, you can go into campus experience, you can go into quality, you can go into world leaders studying in the United States. All of that should be part of the messaging that you have to your prospective student audiences. So it's not all about just you. It's recognizing the U.S. as a destination first, then your institution, and why should be a destination of choice for students from around the world. So that's, I think, what I think soft power can mean in relation to how we use it and talk about it with prospective student audiences. So hopefully that some of that resonates with you now. But when I talk about international students, I really find one of the most challenging parts of the equation is that time that we're in right now. Many colleges have just started their fall terms. We've seen some colleges have been in session for a week or two, but this time of year is arrival day, is orientation. It is the first week of school. And that time, for anyone who's been in international admissions, orientation is really what you live for every year, because it's seeing the fruits of your labor over the last 12 months or longer in some cases of working with students from around the world who've flown from thousands of miles for a day or more in many cases to get to your campus. And now they're finally there. You see them on campus, they're exhausted, but they're also so excited, nervous excitement. Their adrenaline is what's keeping them awake because of the travel that they've had. But they're just so excited to finally be on campus. And the question we're asking here is, how do we solve a problem like orientation? And it's a twofold question, and two-part question here. It's not just figuring out how you manage that orientation program itself, but what you do with it, not just during that time before classes begin, but after orientation as well. Because that's one of the biggest concern any college or international admissions, international student orientation person has had over the years. They'll tell you, first thing more than anything else, that the biggest drawback to the way international orientations have been done is information overload. Because you try and cram in so much information in a short amount of time before, right after those students get on campus, that they're not really processing it all. Maybe getting 30–40% if you're lucky of what you're telling them. And you hope they're getting the immigration regulations, the academic policies, and the health insurance information. Those three things are probably the most vital pieces of what they need to know that help keep them in status, that help keep them safe, that help keep them academically on the up and up in their first semester on your campus. So those are the things that I think you can control and should obviously focus on during orientation. But what you do after that, or shortly after that, there's really been a movement in recent months and years to extend orientation for at least the first semester, if not the first year that your students are on campus, that have a 0 credit or 1 credit class that your international students must register for, to keep them engaged, to talk about practical training, to talk about student employment, to talk about benefits of being an international student, to talk about programming that you do, to talk about student associations and all the other wonderful things that your campus does for international students, to talk about DEI, what that means in the United States, to tackle issues of racism, of academic dishonesty, of other kind of key issues that happen during their time on campus that they need to be familiar with. So ongoing orientations is really something. And there's 2 articles that I'll be sharing with you to kind of help paint the picture a little bit brighter. One of them is from ASU. As I've talked about last week, Arizona State has been doing a phenomenal job in expanding their international enrollments over the last couple of years. They're experiencing another record group this fall. But what they've done here, and I love this, at previous institutions I've worked at, we've done focus groups with international students after they arrive, new students after they arrive, but also do interviews with them, give them a set of 5 questions, short answer questions where they can talk about why they chose ASU, video them doing this. I have them answer some short questions, maybe in a survey or in a newspaper interview or whatever, but capturing that enthusiasm that they have, capturing them saying an answer to a question in their native language when they're all excited, they have that adrenaline, and they are just wanting to share all the why they're so happy to be on your campus. And that's the moment where they're hopefully most engaged and excited. But if you can capture that, it's like lightning in a bottle, and you can repurpose that in so many ways, through video, through social media, through an email communication flow, all of these things, through your website. You can capture these real important moments. There's an article that the ASU article is for an international student interview, talking about their experience, why they chose ASU, all the wonderful questions that you want to ask, but they're now hopefully leveraging that in future student communications. So that's really important. The other piece about supporting institutions beyond orientation week is actually coming from the conversation, and it references doing more after orientation to engage international students with their domestic peers. And it suggests a variety of really useful and creative ways to make those points of engagement possible. Through social interactions, through safe digital spaces, all of these other things. Well worth a read to just get a sense of what we're talking about there. So a lot more to say about the orientation issues, but our time is at an end for our 200th episode. And again, I can't say it enough, but this Roundup would not exist without the folks from around the world that have you listening in live, that you that are watch us on repeat or download the podcast or subscribe. We're just so grateful for you being a part of our journey here and for finding value in what we're doing. So thanks again for being a part of that ride, and we really look forward to seeing you at an upcoming conference, on the road for travel, or online in cyberspace. So thanks again for being here, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Cheers.